Beloved voices across generations once called Bruce Willis unbreakable. But in these quiet seconds before his words spill out, you can hear the fragile tremble of a man who has carried too much love, too much loss, and too many unspoken memories for far too long. The camera lingers on his eyes, those same eyes that once stared down exploding buildings and impossible odds. And now they struggle just to hold back tears. He exhales slowly, as if every breath costs him something. And in that soft, wavering pause, you can feel that what he is about to say has been waiting for decades, buried beneath scripts, red carpets, laughter, and the slow, creeping shadow of illness that has been stealing pieces of him one by one. Bruce speaks gently, sometimes losing a word, and sometimes losing a whole thought, but the emotion never leaves. He talks about time as if it were a thief, slipping through his fingers, and how the memories that remain feel sharper than ever. He says Rob Reiner's name quietly at first, almost like a prayer or a warning, and it sends a shiver through him. To the world, Rob is a beloved storyteller, a man behind some of the most heartfelt films in Hollywood history. But to Bruce, he is also tied to a chapter of his life that he never found the courage to open. Not until now. Not until the years had piled up and the illness had made every unspoken truth feel heavier than any secret he had ever kept. He remembers the first time they met, in a room filled with laughter and creative fire, where everyone felt young and invincible. Bruce was at the height of his fame, riding waves of applause that followed him everywhere, while Rob sat across from him with that familiar warm smile and an intensity that seemed to see straight through him. They talked about stories, about humanity, about how movies could make people feel less alone. Bruce says he trusted him instantly, and that trust would one day become both a gift and a quiet burden he never knew how to set down. He pauses here, eyes glistening, and you can almost feel him weighing what he should and should not reveal, knowing that time is no longer on his side. The illness is always there in the room with him now, like an invisible guest. He doesn't name it directly at first, but he describes how words sometimes drift away and faces blur into unfamiliar shapes. He says it is terrifying to feel your own mind slipping, to worry that one day even the people you love most might become strangers. And that fear is part of why he finally decided to speak. He says there are things about Rob, about their shared past, that he's afraid might vanish with the rest of his memories if he doesn't let them out now. His family urged him to rest, to stay quiet, but there is a restless urgency in his voice, a need to leave something true behind. He begins to talk about a film they once dreamed of making together, a story that was meant to be deeply personal, filled with grief and redemption. Bruce says it was supposed to be his chance to show a different side of himself, something raw and honest that went far beyond action heroes and one-liners. Rob encouraged him, telling him he could trust the process, trust the vision. But somewhere along the way, something changed. Bruce doesn't accuse, he doesn't shout, but you can feel the ache in his words as he describes feeling unheard, as if the story he wanted to tell was quietly reshaped into something safer, something less risky, something that no longer felt like his own. The hurt from that time never fully healed. Bruce says he smiled through interviews, posed for photos, and kept working alongside giants like Meryl Streep, Jack Nicholson, and Morgan Freeman, all while carrying this small, persistent sense of betrayal. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't explosive, but it was deep, like a crack in a foundation that you don't notice until years later when everything starts to feel unsteady. He admits that he never confronted Rob directly, that pride and fear kept him silent, and now he wonders how many moments in his life were shaped by words he was too afraid to speak. His voice breaks when he talks about his family, about his children, and the woman who stands beside him now as his memory fades. He worries about what they will remember of him, and whether they will ever know the full truth of the man he was behind the roles. He says there are nights when he wakes up not knowing where he is, and in those moments the past comes rushing back in fragments, including the face of Rob Reiner, smiling, encouraging, and unknowingly leaving behind a wound that never quite closed. It is not anger that fills Bruce now, but a heavy sadness the kind that comes from realizing how much time has been lost. He looks into the camera as if he is looking straight into Rob's eyes, and for a brief moment the room feels unbearably intimate. He says he doesn't want revenge or apology anymore, just understanding. He wants the truth of what he felt to exist somewhere outside of his fading mind. The world has seen him as a hero, a star, a legend. But in this moment, he is just a man trying to make peace with a story that has haunted him longer than anyone ever knew. His words trail off softly, like a confession whispered in the dark, and you can sense that this is only the beginning of what he's been holding inside all these years. The room feels heavier now, as if Bruce's words have changed the air itself. He shifts slightly in his chair, a subtle movement that seems to take more effort than it once would have, and he allows a long silence to stretch out before he continues. Silence, he says, has become both his enemy and his refuge. Sometimes it swallows the words he wants to say, and other times it gives him the courage to finally let them out. He closes his eyes for a moment, and when he opens them again, there is a distant look in them, as though he is watching an old film of his own life playing behind the camera. He starts talking about the years that follow that project with Rob, how his career kept soaring while something inside him quietly sank. On the surface, everything looked perfect. He was working with legends, sharing scenes with people like Demi Moore, who knew him better than almost anyone, and later standing alongside actors like Brad Pitt and Cate Blanchett, who admired his fearless energy. But he says there was always this strange hollowness, a feeling that one of his most honest chances had slipped away. He never blamed the audience or the industry. The truth, he admits, is that he blamed himself for not fighting harder for what he believed in, for not telling Rob how deeply it mattered to him. As the illness crept in, those regrets grew louder. He describes forgetting simple things at first, a name here, a line of dialogue there, and how he laughed it off like everyone else. But then came the days when he would look at a script and feel a quiet panic rising in his chest, because the words refused to stay where they belonged. He says Rob was one of the first people in Hollywood to notice something was wrong, and that makes this story even more complicated. There were phone calls filled with concern, gentle check-ins that felt sincere, and yet underneath them, Bruce could still feel the echo of that unresolved pain. He recalls one conversation in particular late at night when Rob told him how much he admired his strength. Bruce says he almost told him everything then, almost let the truth spill out, but fear stopped him again. Fear of hurting someone he once trusted, fear of being misunderstood, fear that maybe it was all too late anyway. Now, with his memory slipping like sand through his fingers, that moment haunts him. He wonders what might have changed if he had been brave enough to speak when his mind was still sharp and his voice still steady. His family has become his anchor through all of this. He talks about his wife holding his hand when the confusion gets too much, and his daughters gently reminding him of who he is when he forgets. They know about Rob, about the quiet sadness that always followed his name, and they encouraged him to finally tell his story. Not for gossip, not for headlines, but so that their children and the world would understand the weight he has been carrying. Bruce's voice cracks when he says that the hardest part of losing his memory is the fear of losing the truth along with it. He also mentions other friends who have been there for him, like Samuel L. Jackson and Morgan Freeman, men who shared not just sets but long, late-night talks about life and mortality. He says they all know what it is like to face the end of something, whether it is a career, a chapter, or a sense of self. But this story with Rob feels different, more personal, like a wound that never got the chance to heal properly. He doesn't paint Rob as a villain. Instead, he describes him as a man who may never have realized the depth of the impact he had on someone who admired him so deeply. As Bruce continues, the camera captures small details, the way his hands tremble slightly, the way he struggles to find the right words but refuses to give up. He says he is not angry anymore. Re-anger takes too much energy, and he has learned that every bit of energy is precious now. What he feels instead is a longing for closure, for a simple acknowledgement of what was lost. He wants Rob to know that their shared history mattered more to him than anyone ever knew, and that the silence between them has been one of the hardest things to live with. The story feels like it is slowly opening a door to something much deeper, something neither of them ever fully faced. Bruce leans back, exhausted but determined, and the room falls quiet again, heavy with all the words still waiting to be spoken. You can sense that the most painful parts of his truth are still ahead, lingering just beyond this moment, ready to surface when he finds the strength to go on. Bruce takes another breath, a shaky one, and there is a rawness now that wasn't there before, as if each memory he pulls forward is costing him something he can never get back. He says that when you live long enough, you begin to realize that the biggest heartbreaks aren't always the loud ones. Sometimes they are the quiet disappointments that sit in your chest for years, slowly shaping who you become. His story with Rob, he admits, was exactly that. Not a single explosive betrayal, but 1,000 small moments where he felt unseen, unheard, and quietly replaced by safer choices and easier narratives. He remembers sitting in editing rooms, watching scenes that once felt deeply personal to him being cut or softened. Rob would smile and explain it was for the audience, for the studio, for the flow of the story. Bruce nodded, because that's what you do when you want to be a team player. But inside, he felt a part of himself slipping away, as if the heart of what he wanted to say was being erased. He says that at the time, he told himself it didn't matter, that he was lucky just to be working with someone so respected. Now, decades later, that self-dismissal feels like one of his greatest regrets. The illness has a cruel way of bringing these regrets into sharp focus. Bruce describes waking up some mornings with a strange, aching clarity, knowing that his time to make peace with the past is running out. He says there are days when he can't remember what he had for breakfast, but he can remember exactly how he felt in that room with Rob all those years ago. The mind, he says, has its own priorities, and somehow this story refuses to be forgotten. It clings to him, asking to be acknowledged before it fades forever. He talks about a message he once tried to write to Rob, long after their last real conversation. It was supposed to be simple, just a note saying he hoped they were both doing well. But as he typed, the words turned into something heavier, something filled with everything he never said. He never sent it. Fear won again. Now he wonders if that unsent message will always be the truest thing he ever wrote about their relationship, even if no one else ever reads it. Other faces drift into the story as well, people who saw both sides of him. He mentions Demi, how she would look at him and know when something was wrong even when he said he was fine. He talks about conversations with directors like Quentin Tarantino, who once told him that honesty in art is the only thing that lasts. Hearing that now makes his chest tighten, because he feels like he failed to live up to that truth when it mattered most. He chose comfort over honesty, and the price of that choice has followed him ever since. The sadness in his voice deepens when he reflects on how illness changes your sense of urgency. He says that before, he always thought there would be time. Time to fix things, time to speak up, time to heal old wounds. Now time feels like a fragile thread that could snap at any moment. That's why he's sitting here, telling this story to a camera instead of keeping it locked inside. He doesn't want his children to inherit his silence, or for Rob to one day wonder what Bruce really felt when it is already too late to ask. He makes it clear that he doesn't believe Rob ever meant to hurt him. In fact, that might be what makes it all so painful. Sometimes the deepest wounds come not from cruelty, but from carelessness, from moments when someone doesn't realize how much power they have over your heart. Bruce says he admired Rob deeply, and that admiration made every small disappointment feel much bigger than it would have otherwise. It is hard to grieve something that never had a clear ending, something that simply drifted away without closure. By the time he finishes this part of his story, his eyes are wet and his voice is barely above a whisper. The room feels like it is holding its breath with him, waiting for what he will reveal next. There is a sense that the most painful truths, the ones he has avoided for a lifetime, are now right on the edge of being spoken. And once they are, nothing will ever feel the same again. Bruce's hands are clasped together now, knuckles pale, as if he is holding on to himself, so he doesn't drift too far into the memories that are pulling at him. He says that there was a moment years ago when everything he felt about Rob finally rose to the surface, a moment he has replayed in his mind countless times. It was at a quiet Hollywood gathering, one of those events where famous faces mingle behind soft music and polite smiles. Rob was there, laughing with friends, still carrying that warmth everyone adored. Bruce watched him from across the room and felt a strange mix of love, disappointment, and longing all at once. He almost walked over. He almost said everything. But then someone called his name, and the moment slipped away like it always did. That mischance has haunted him more than any bad review or box office failure ever could. He says it is amazing how one small hesitation can shape the rest of your life, how a few unsaid words can become a lifetime of quiet ache. Now, with his illness blurring the edges of everything else, that memory remains painfully clear. He begins to talk about the way his condition has stripped away the armor he wore for so many years. Bruce Willis, the action star, the tough guy, the unstoppable hero, that version of him is slowly fading. What remains is just a man who wants to be understood. He admits that there are days when he feels like a stranger in his own body, when even his own reflection feels unfamiliar. In those moments, the past feels both comforting and cruel, bringing back emotions he thought he had buried for good. His family hears him cry at night sometimes, he says, and they don't always know why. Sometimes it's because he can't remember a word, and sometimes it's because he can't forget one. Rob's name is one of those words that still carries so much weight. He worries that one day he might forget why it ever mattered, and that thought terrifies him more than forgetting anything else. To him, this story is proof that he lived, that he cared, that he was more than just a collection of roles and famous lines, that he speaks softly about forgiveness, not as something he has fully achieved, but as something he is still learning to reach for. He says he doesn't know if Rob even realizes how deeply he affected him, and part of him wonders if that ignorance is its own kind of tragedy. Hollywood moves so fast, always chasing the next big thing, and sometimes it leaves emotional wreckage behind without ever looking back. Bruce was strong, enough to keep going, but that doesn't mean he wasn't hurt. Other legends come to mind as he talks, people like Clint Eastwood and Harrison Ford, who once told him that the hardest battles aren't fought on screen. He finally understands what they meant. This battle, the one inside him, the one between silence and truth, has been the hardest of all. And now, with his voice growing weaker and his memory less reliable, he feels an overwhelming need to let the truth breathe, even if it's messy and painful. The camera stays on him as he struggles to steady himself. Tears slip down his face, and he doesn't bother to wipe them away. He says he is not trying to rewrite history or place blame. He just wants to say what he never said, to let Rob know that he mattered in ways that go far beyond credits and accolades. That their story, however imperfect, was real and meaningful to him. And S's words fade into another long silence. The weight of everything he has shared hangs in the air. You can feel that he is nearing the heart of his confession, the part he has been circling for so long. Whatever comes next will change the way this story is remembered, and perhaps the way Bruce himself finally finds a measure of peace. It feels like the night has grown darker around Bruce, even though nothing in the room has changed. He seems smaller somehow, not in spirit, but in the way a man becomes small when he finally lets go of a secret that has been pressing against his heart for too long. He says that the truth he is about to share is not something he has ever spoken out loud, not to Rob, not to his family, not even to himself in a clear and honest way. His voice drops, and every word carries the weight of something that has been waiting decades to be heard. He admits that the project he and Rob worked on all those years ago wasn't just another film to him. It was meant to be his goodbye to a version of himself he was already starting to outgrow. He was tired of being the invincible hero. He wanted to show vulnerability, pain, the kind of quiet humanity that Rob was famous for bringing to the screen. But when the story changed, when his character's emotional core was softened and reshaped, Bruce felt like a piece of his own truth had been taken from him. He never told Rob that it felt like losing a chance to finally be seen for who he really was. The worst part, he says, is that he blamed himself. He told himself he was being dramatic, that he should be grateful just to be part of something so respected. That self-doubt, that constant second-guessing, became a shadow that followed him through the rest of his career. Even when he was working with people like Christopher Nolan or Steven Spielberg, even when audiences around the world were cheering for him, there was always this quiet voice inside reminding him of what he didn't say, of the honesty he never demanded for himself. Now, with his illness slowly erasing pieces of his identity, that lost honesty feels unbearable. He says there are days when he doesn't recognize his own accomplishments, when awards and old films feel like they belong to someone else. But he still remembers how that project with Rob made him feel, how deeply he wanted it to be something more, something truer. That memory is like a lighthouse in the fog of his mind, guiding him back to who he was when he still believed he had all the time in the world. He talks about regret in a way that is painfully gentle. Regret, he says, is not loud or dramatic. It is a soft, constant ache that sits with you, waiting for quiet moments to remind you of everything you wish you had done differently. His regret why. T.H. Rob is not about anger or revenge. It is about a misconnection, a moment of shared humanity that slipped through his fingers because he was too afraid to reach for it. There's a long pause, and you can hear the faint sound of his breathing. He looks straight into the camera again, and for the first time, there's a strange calm in his eyes. He says that he hopes Rob will hear this one day, not as an accusation, but as an invitation. An invitation to finally understand what that time meant to him, and perhaps to remember it differently too. Even now, after everything, Bruce still believes in the power of understanding to heal what time and silence have broken. The room feels filled with something fragile and sacred, as if a lifetime of unspoken emotion has finally been given permission to exist. Bruce leans back, exhausted but strangely lighter, and you can sense that only one more chapter of this story remains to be told, the one that will bring everything he has shared into its final, haunting shape. Bruce sits very still now, as if moving might cause everything he has just said to fall apart. There is a tenderness in his expression that feels almost childlike, the kind that only comes when someone has finally laid their heart bare. He says that as his illness has progressed, he has learned something painful and beautiful at the same time. When memories start to fade, what remains are not the details of fame or fortune, but the emotions that shaped you. Love, regret, gratitude, and sorrow stay behind, even when names and dates begin to disappear. He speaks about Rob again, not with bitterness, but with a quiet longing. He says that part of him still hopes Rob might reach out one day, not to defend himself or explain, but simply to share a moment of truth before it is too late. Bruce knows that his time, at least as he has always known it, is running out. There will come a day when he may no longer be able to tell this story, when the words will no longer come at all. That thought fills him with both fear and determination. He wants this confession to exist so that even if he forgets, the truth will not be completely lost. He mentions his children again, how they sit with him and watch old movies sometimes. They laugh at his jokes on screen, and he laughs too, even when he doesn't fully remember filming them. But there are moments when he looks at them and feels an overwhelming wave of love mixed with sadness, because he knows he is slowly becoming a stranger to his own past. He hopes that one day, when they're older, they will understand why he needed to speak now, why telling this story about Rob and himself mattered so much to him. The legacy he leaves behind, he says, is no longer about being remembered as a tough guy or a Hollywood icon. It is about being remembered as someone who finally had the courage to be honest. Honest about his fears, his mistakes, and the relationships that shaped him, even when they were complicated and painful. He wants people to know that behind every smiling photograph and every red carpet moment, there was a man who struggled just like anyone else, who loved deeply and sometimes suffered quietly. There's a softness in his voice as he reaches the end of what he has to say. He thanks Rob, not sarcastically, but sincerely, for the moments they did share, for the inspiration and the dreams that once felt so close. He says that even though things didn't turn out the way he hoped, Ed, Those memories are still part of who he is, and he doesn't want to erase them. He just wants them to be seen for what they were, imperfect, human, and real. That as the camera slowly pulls back, Bruce looks smaller, but also strangely at peace. The storm of words has passed, leaving behind a quiet that feels both heavy and gentle. His story, filled with secrets, regret, and a longing for understanding, now belongs to anyone willing to listen. There's a sense that something has been released, something that was never meant to be carried alone for so long. Bruce doesn't say anything at first. He just sits there, breathing softly, as if he is listening to something only he can hear. Maybe it is the echo of his own voice, or maybe it is the memories still drifting through his mind, fragile and flickering like old film reels. When he finally speaks again, it is barely above a whisper, but it carries a depth that feels almost unbearable. He says that telling the truth did not magically erase the pain, but it made the weight of it easier to carry. For the first time in a long while, he feels like he is no longer alone with his own story. He imagines Rob somewhere out there, perhaps watching this one day, perhaps hearing his words long after they were spoken. He hopes Rob will understand that this confession was never meant to tear anyone down. It was meant to build a small bridge between two people who once shared something meaningful and then let it slip away. Bruce says that if Rob ever thinks of him now, he hopes it will be with the same warmth and respect that he still holds in his own heart, even after all the years of silence. The illness continues its slow, quiet march through his life, and he knows there will be days when he may not remember this moment at all. That is the cruel irony of it. He says that you can finally find the courage to speak just as your mind begins to forget. But there is also a strange beauty in that. The truth, once spoken, no longer belongs only to him. It lives in the hearts of those who hear it, in the family who loves him, and perhaps even in the man whose name has been tied to this story for so long that he looks at the camera one last time, eyes full of both sorrow and gratitude. He thanks the people who stood by him when he could no longer stand as strong as he once did. He thanks his family for their patience, their love, and their gentle reminders of who he is. And he thanks the past, even with all its mistakes, for giving him something real to hold on to in a world that is slowly becoming unfamiliar. As the screen begins to fade, Bruce leans back and closes his eyes. There is no dramatic music, no grand final line, just the quiet presence of a man who has finally let his truth breathe. In that silence, his story lingers, mysterious and tender, a reminder that even legends carry hidden wounds, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do, especially at the end, is simply to tell the truth.